Hello and welcome to Deft and Dorky. We're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons.
Dungeons and
How's it
Dragons.
going? We're
I'm
here.
so good.
We're back. Me and Brian. We're going to talk about stuff. Uh,
Dungeons and Dragons.
Dungeons and Dragons stuff. Today
We've
we're going to
established,
talk.
huh?
Yeah, we're going to talk about flow and pacing.
Yes.
Um, and what I kind of want to talk about both in a like overall campaign and just within a session. What do you think is? What do you think is good like flow for a session?
Yeah, so when I brought this up to you, I was kind of thinking the struggle that can occur sometimes when you kind of get bogged down in a particular scene or event or non-event, or when your players feel maybe a little lost, or maybe they feel like they know exactly what they need to do, but they're not sure how to do it, you know?
Okay.
Like I am fully on board with allowing your players to talk it out and have the agency to do whatever it is they want. But those moments where it feels like they just kind of get stuck, or you get stuck, or and it could be for any number of reasons. Maybe there's a very complex problem in front of them and they're just trying to figure it out. Or maybe they're very divisive on which way to go about it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you've got a group of people that no one really wants to take the lead on it or whatever. How do
Okay.
you just keep the game moving, whether it's at a crux of your campaign, the overarching story, or individual moments? Um, because they've happened to me both as a player and as a DM, where it's just I feel like we're kind of we need a needle to move us forward, and at a good one though. You know what I mean? You don't want to be
Mm-hmm.
I'm the psycho, chaotic, neutral character that just says "F it" and I'm gonna throw a chair through a window. Oh, that'll spark some action.
Yeah.
So I
Um.
have to admit, this feels like one of those topics where I'm not 1,000% sure on how to do it or even put the words to it, but it's just something that I thought would be interesting to talk about.
Okay. Yeah. Certainly that has happened in my campaigns more than once.
Yeah, it has. No, I'm just
um.
kidding.
And yeah, I'm not sure because on one hand, I don't want to. I don't. I don't want to be heavy-handed and be like, well,
Right.
this is what you need to do, and just tell my players where to go. What I'm trying to work at getting better at is supplying the reasons to do things.
Sure.
Um, and I guess I don't know, like this the sense of urgency I guess is the big like elephant in the room, and I'm not sure how to deal with it exactly, because if things are like urgent, right,
Hmm.
then this is the thing we have to do because it's the thing that matters right now. But
Right.
if things are not urgent, then you can certainly get into that situation where it's like, well, they got a lot of things that we could do, but nothing feels like we need to do it.
Right.
So I think I don't know, because whenever I like write out a bunch of like hooks or whatever, and then you guys like go up to a job board or talk to people or whatever and get all these different things that you could be doing. I don't. If I've written things out for them, I don't want to waste them. Right? I don't want to be
Hmm.
like, well, if you don't do it now, it goes away forever.
Right. For
Because if
sure.
I've spent time writing it and setting up things for it, I don't want to waste it. Um, but yeah, I don't know. What you have thoughts on it?
So, let's take individual instances, right? Let's
Mm-hmm.
say, one thing that I see that Matt Mercer does in Critical Role or whatever. Actually, let me start with Dimension 20 and Brennan Lee Mulligan, because
Okay.
those are so structured and they're built for TV. And I believe that there's authentic moments in them and there's a lot of flexibility and he kind of rolls with it. But I also believe that hey, we've got, I mean, every episode is we've got roughly 90-ish minutes or whatever, and we know that we're going to do a combat episode and then RP episode, and it kind of alternates
Mm-hmm.
almost with, how do you say, how do you say, um, like almost expectedly, right?
Okay.
And so he really will like take moments where it's just like if his players are kind of getting bogged down, he's just like, all right, insert like next plot point, boom, like a nuke that just kind of drops in.
Okay.
And it's just like, and sometimes he'll even be like, yeah, you guys finish up there, and then you find yourself walking towards this place. And it's just like, okay, I guess they're walking towards that place. Like if I was, there's times where I listen to it now, having done both, where it's just like, oh my gosh, like I would never do that to my players. And if I was a player, I'd be like, no, we're not. We
Yeah,
are
I mean
not in that.
that is like the most direct solution, right? Is just be like, okay,
No.
you're moving.
But then, like, I think that Matt does it in like a more subtle way, and their form allows for it, you know.
Yeah.
And sometimes he'll be like, like let's say it's combat, and someone's just taking a long term, like he'll give them like multiple, like, all right, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What's the plan? All right, I'm gonna give you 30 seconds to decide, otherwise you're gonna lose your turn. Like I remember listening to one like Talzin lost his turn or whatever because he took forever to decide, and I was just
Hmm.
like, oh my gosh, like that would be.
Pick something.
They again are in a position where it's just like, okay, we are entertaining people and this is dragging, so we need to move on. But
Hmm.
the other thing that sometimes I feel like Matt does in the middle of those moments is he'll like, if the players are kind of stuck, like they have all these times where they're like, we're walking and talking, we're walking and talking.
Yeah.
Because like they feel that like I'm gonna do something to you if you guys just sit here and you're talking in the middle of the open.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen him be like, if they just start talking and it seems like they're not doing anything, like it was, it's around this time.
Yeah,
And then he inserts like something happens to them, right?
right, right.
Which is, I mean, a good idea, but it's not always an option for like if you guys are in like a safe place.
Hmm.
It's not always a, especially that tower. It's been nice not having that tower be a regular go-to for a while.
The oh yeah 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 yeah
Because
yeah. I
nothing can
mean
happen to you there, really.
yeah, absolutely. I one other thing that I just kind of like, I in my games that I DM for, my wife plays in both of them,
Hmm.
and so she's like a great sounding board for me.
Yeah.
Because like at the end of the day, like I want to make sure that we're all having fun, and so like if you have a shopping episode and all three of your players are into it, like great, like you could spend the entire 3 hours in the town doing that.
Yeah.
But like sometimes I'll check in with her and I'll be like, "Hey, how was that tonight? Like, did you enjoy it? Do you think it was fun? Do you think the other players did?" And it's good feedback. So I mean, like I guess like another thing is just asking your players, like, "Hey, how's it going?" Like, I'm doing this Curse of Strahd campaign with my wife and my two siblings, and there's this like introductory prologue that's really famous called the Death House,
Hmm.
and like a lot of people recommend it as a one shot. Like if
Okay.
you're looking to do something. We took like 3 or 4 sessions to get through it, and it was like a huge learning curve for me to like understand pacing and like, hey, as a DM, like just because the module has all this shiz written in it, like you don't have to know it all or do it all.
Hmm.
And so like looking back, I'd be like, man, I could have crushed through that in a single session, and my players would have been there for it. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't dragging because of them.
Yeah.
And so it is one of those things where it's just like, I think acknowledging that like you may have a lot of stuff that you prepare, not all of it is going to get touched, and the stuff that doesn't, like just recycle it for later, you know?
Yeah.
Like let go of that shiz, earmark it or dog ear it. What is that phrase? Dog ear?
Bookmark it.
Like bookmark it, sure. And move on, you know? So
Yeah. That's fair. I guess do you well, before we jump off this, are there any other thoughts you have on like like spurring or any of those, anything on that thread?
um I think it's good to do, especially I mean like as a DM, like you know so much more than your players know, you know?
It's, yeah. That's something that I
Like,
have to tell myself constantly because I, when I'm DNing, I have like the whole world essentially like in my brain, and when
yeah,
I'm playing, I am looking at only what's right in front of me.
right. Yes. And like if you're watching your players and they're kind of spinning their wheels, like sometimes it's like there's a lot of times where I'll just like acknowledge that whatever my RP was, like I'm not a phenomenal actor or anything like that. There's content that gets missed or I like forget about or get stressed out about, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so like sometimes I'll just be like, by the way, this person also told you this really helpful information last time, but I didn't, you know?
Oh, okay. That's what you're saying.
And frankly, half the time, like there's so much that happens in a session, and depending on how far apart your sessions are, like your players, I'm not saying you should like intentionally try and dupe them and be like, "Oh yeah, I said that," but like I've never had one of my players be like, "Oh, they didn't say that," you know? They're like, "Oh yeah," like there's so much that goes on there, and I'll acknowledge it. Like, yeah, by the way, I forgot to mention this pivotal piece of information that they told you or whatever.
It's around this time. Fred comes sprinting up to you. I forgot to tell you.
I should have said this to you. I'm so sorry I didn't. So, but you know,
Yeah. I guess one of the things I did want to say about that is that, like, because obviously you want to make it fun for your players, and whenever I like to take feedback, but at the same time, sometimes the feedback goes in a direction that either is not a strong suit of mine, or a direction that I just I don't feel like it's fun for me to go.
yeah,
So, and that's one of the things that I feel like sometimes gets forgotten when talking about D&D broadly, is that the DM is also a player. So
yeah,
if the DM is like catering so much to the players that the DM is no longer having fun,
hmm,
then that's maybe not the right table.
right,
So
absolutely,
that's something else that has to be sort of thought about, and it's tough because it's hard to find a table at all
yeah,
sometimes. So, but that's like a big, I guess it's a big thing in the D&D community, is that no D&D is better than bad D&D,
yeah,
which sucks, but ultimately is true, I suppose. Um, but yeah, that's one of those things that it's, if you're getting feedback like that, is essentially saying that the things you're doing in this campaign are not the things that I like to do, then
hmm,
maybe that's not the right campaign for that DM player combo.
yeah, absolutely.
So you
And
also have
then,
to try to find players that like what you're putting down.
yeah, absolutely. And you know, like for me, like there's an element of like give and take in that too,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because like when people talk about these things, like I always, it's this is a real life thing as well. Like the amount of times that I tell this to my employees, like you got to decide like what hills do you want to die on? You know what I mean? Like, 'cause I agree with you. I think that there are absolutely some things where it's just like, I'm running this game. Like you don't have to play it if you don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
But then like sometimes I'll be like, oh, that's an interesting point. I think that's also cool, and I can mix in a little bit more of that. Like, let's
Yeah.
go with that.
Yeah.
Like,
Absolutely.
so I, yeah. So feedback's important. It's really good, especially because like I think the amount of stuff that is like intended but doesn't actually happen is significant, or vice versa, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
stuff that happens that wasn't intended, like so.
Yeah. Do you think? And I guess this is kind of just what we've sort of been circling. Is, do you think that? Uh, well, why do you think players not knowing what to do specifically is a bad thing versus just letting them take the time to like weigh what to do? You understand what I'm trying to ask?
Yeah,
Okay.
I do. I mean, like, I think the difference is like in one of those scenarios they have options, and the other one they don't, or they feel like they're stuck. I don't know.
Okay.
Like, I think that if a player feels like I'm not sure what to do next, I think as a DM, I would say, like, have I given them enough signposts to point them in a potential place? Or have I presented them with enough of an interactable, like, situation? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is hard because I feel like the amount of times that that happens should be pretty infrequent, right? Because it's like D&D is so like, hey, fantasy adventure trope, like hero's journey. Like, there's usually like bad guy or
Yeah.
like bad things happening, and it's like, hey, let's intervene. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Like, do you
So
ever feel like? Sorry, you can comment on this, and then
no,
I
go
was just
ahead.
gonna ask a question. I was gonna ask, like, do you ever feel like? Because I think we've all had these moments where, like, oh, like I created this thing, like dungeon, puzzle, interesting shopkeeper, like whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then like you I have had moments where I've realized in the moment it's like, oh, like they know that they need to do this, and they've got A, B, and C, but D and E are like pivotal bridges to get to F.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I didn't supply them with that. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, yeah. Like, by the way, you also know this, or like, hey, this is also there, and I forgot to mention that. Like, there's those moments where it's like, I mean, for example, in the one shot that we had, like, you guys were given a very clear objective of killing this thing. And when I had constructed the whole thing, I had it in my mind that you were sealing it away for whatever reason, but I kept telling you something else. And so in my mind, you got to a point where you're just like, well, what the freak do we do now? Like, and then I realized, like, oh my gosh, like, for those of you that are listening and not watching, I'm beating my fist together as if I'm plugging two plugs in. Like, it's just connected for me where I was just like, oh, my bad. Yeah. Shoot. So, but like I guess I'm more interested in that question from the standpoint of like if you feel like there's like kind of a gap in your campaign. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And like that's happened a few times in my campaigns where you guys like you have things to do, but none of them seem like either urgent or particularly important.
Or
And
interesting.
yeah, and so you kind of like sit around and talk about what you should do. And in those instances, like I usually have the things that come after a little bit of time set up, right? That are
Hmm.
bigger things, and I
Right.
can't give them to you right then necessarily because they will
Hmm.
kill you.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm like, yeah, there's totally this job board that's, it's designed to be like a very small arc that's interesting once you get into it, hopefully, and
Yeah.
supplies you with like experience that you need to like get to the next level essentially. Because I don't know,
Totally.
like I want it, I go back and forth between wanting everything to feel important
Hmm.
and being like, well, if everything feels important, then the really important stuff doesn't feel as important. so
Totally. Absolutely. And like
so I get stuck
defining
there.
what is important too, right? Like
Yeah.
that's so for example in my Strahd campaign, like we've only played a little bit, and I'm discovering now that the things that are the most important to my players are like this one big bad evil guy and their own personal things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like I have this other stuff in between that I think is super cool, and hopefully they do too when they hit. But like they've come to those moments, and it's been kind of they haven't been like rude about it or whatever, but it just feels kind of like, oh yeah, like this is something in our way, we'll do it and move on,
Yeah.
rather than like, oh man, I thought that thing was super cool, but I
Well,
guess it was just another thing in front of you, you know.
okay. Well, I have an example of this that sort of
Sure.
thing, and
Yeah.
that's Ivia's mansion. I was dropping hints for that for like what felt like months, and I was like, "It's cool, I promise." but you guys are like, I just can't put that on the back burner. I was like,
And
okay,
it
that's fair. I don't.
totally, it totally was cool. Like I want to give you credit for that. Like that was a really fun part of the campaign. But it is like it's I had that quest log, you know what I mean? And like
Yeah.
we like occasionally return to it. And it was just interesting to see how things got prioritized, by
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, that feels really urgent, or that's very personal to me, or like that sounds cool. And it was funny because it was just like, well, somewhere in the ether there's a mansion. I guess maybe for me there was an element of like I have no idea where to even start with that. And
Mm-hmm.
so like I do know where to start with these things. So like let's do the stuff where I feel like is accessible to me.
Mm-hmm.
So like another I keep going back to the Strahd campaign. Like Strahd can get to a point where it feels very sandboxy because the players have a lot of choices with where to go. And I have like really leaned into that heavily.
Mm-hmm.
And I know everything about the module, and it's like, okay, well, like there's this kind of pathway that is really kind of like maybe the curated one, but I wanted to introduce an element of agency for my players. And I am fascinated in the way they were like, yeah, we want to go this route. And I'm like, okay, well, if I go by the module, you guys should be at level 9 and you're only level 5 for that stuff. So I guess I'm tweaking things, which they don't know that. And I think
Yeah.
that that's totally fine.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think I want to set it up kind of Oblivion style. So it's just like all the monsters are your level.
Yeah. And
So,
that's a thing that, well, not always, but oftentimes you kind of have to do. If you
yes.
drop a hint at something that they just grab onto and go for it,
Mhm.
and you're like, but that was just supposed to be a little hint that I was gonna do more with later, and they're like, no, we're
Mhm.
going now. I'm like, okay. And if it's not like a pivotal plot line that's like
Yeah.
leads to the BBEG or something, then you just gotta tune it down and
Yeah.
do your best to move with it.
I've also found this, like, I've started to, in my DM prep, like, I'm starting to get to a point where there's very little I want to have very little that's rote in the sense that like I'm going to read this verbatim to you. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? But
Yeah.
then there are things that I feel like are like if I'm going to give them that like crossroads and be like choose, and I feel like there are things that would clarify it for them so they have a better idea. Like for example, when they first met a character that I think is very complex and nuanced and actually really interesting, I hadn't done that where I hadn't like supplied him with the bullet points of like this is what Ismark knows and needs to tell the party.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I feel like I missed like 30% of whatever it was. And so they all felt like he was very one-dimensional, this like cowardly, flat, kind
Yeah.
of annoying character who is kind of cagey. And so they
Yeah.
were like, well, screw this guy, we're moving on. And it's like, all right, I realize you missed like X, Y, and Z about him, and so therefore he did feel very thin rather than kind of fleshed out. And also like, screw you, we don't need you. Like, let's move on, you know?
Yeah.
So,
That's that's the thing that I've heard other DMs talk about is like you never know which NPCs your party is going to latch onto and which
yeah.
they're just going to discard. So like that's kind of like Fribs. Fribs was was not supposed to be an important character.
That guy was awesome, dude.
But you guys like ended up going back and talking to him again. So I was like,
Mhm.
let's okay, what was his deal? Like quickly.
I love that guy. I need to cast setting to him more often. But I think that's true also of like, so for example, like Ivia's Mansion, for example, like as a player, I felt like Isaac's probably going to give us something later for this because I feel like we have zero things down right now. And that's likely because I just missed a clue or something. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, same with my players. Like, I believe they kind of chose the route that they did. Um, that's not as good as example, but they made some choices where I feel like, oh, if I would have remembered to kind of clue that in, then I think they would have gone about that differently. And so I've started to in my recaps and my notes, and also when I'm talking to them, like that's when it's just like, okay, I'm going to refer back to my notes in the middle of this interaction so that I know that I hit these 7 bullet points in this conversation. And if they're about to like leave or whatever, I'm like, hey, before you go, you should just know this as well. Like it feels kind of canned a little bit, but it's just like,
Yeah,
I need you guys to be aware.
I do that all the time.
Yeah.
You guys are like sitting around talking, and I'll be like, okay, this is what you know. And I'll
Yeah.
go through the bullet points.
It is phenomenally helpful. Like, I mean, we're probably going to play Monday for the first time in
Yeah, hope so.
a month.
Yeah,
So, which I think those breaks are great. Like, I think they're refreshing. I think it's good for people to step away. Like, I love what Critical Role does. Like, I think that's like they take every, what is it, last Thursday or Wednesday off or
yeah.
whatever.
Take 1 week. Basically, well, they don't take it off, but they,
Right. They do
from the
something
campaign,
else.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. They
So,
take a week off per month, essentially.
yeah.
But they are doing a lot more than we're doing.
And they're getting paid handsomely
Yes,
for
they
it.
are.
So,
They just
way
well,
to go.
that's a topic for they just launched their membership thing, but that's neither here nor there.
Wait, what is this? Sorry. It is neither here nor there, but I don't know what it is. So.
It's just like they think it's called Beacon. I think it's basically like their own membership thing. Like D20 has Dropout TV,
Oh, okay. So,
so
like,
Critical Role, all their stuff is going under a thing called Beacon.
are they gonna like lock their content behind it?
Not the campaign, not the stuff that's already out. Like
Okay.
not the things they're already doing, but they're adding
Right.
things to Beacon.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as that's the one thing where I'm just like, dude, don't make me do that. Like, I love you guys and I would do it, but don't make me.
But anyway, back to pacing.
Yeah.
I do want to touch because unless you have more to say about the way what we're currently talking about, I do want to talk about pacing, like what feels good as far as how you run a session or campaign, as far as the
Mm-hmm.
fast parts and slow parts.
Mm-hmm.
It tends to be that if there is a combat, it will dominate the pace of the session.
Yeah, dude. Holy smokes.
How do you feel about like the time spent on combat versus time spent on RP for as far as pacing goes?
Yeah, so this is great because I was kind of thinking about like I think one thing that comes back to me is that like this is a game and we're here to have fun. And we're all playing a game because we like games, right? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
fun to play games. RP can sometimes feel a little like when I'm thinking about pacing of an overall campaign, like you don't always want to be like punching them through dungeons unless that's what you want to do, right? But
Yeah.
like it's important to remember that like during RP moments and downtime, like, hey, we're still playing a game. And I think a lot of the fun for us, even though like you and I, like we love the narrative element of this game and we love the story, like it's still important that it kind of is held afloat by the occasional dice roll. You know what I mean? Like there has to be stakes involved. Like there
Mm-hmm.
is a gambling element of like, I'm going to roll this dice and it's going to influence the outcome. And so for me, like making sure that there's still that gamesmanship element there is important. So like when it comes to combat, there's a lot of that, right? Like everything has a rule and a dice roll and stuff like that. But when there's RP, there's like not as much. And like I want to try to find the moments where I can tell a player in an effectual way, like, hey, roll this. Because like one of the last times that we played, I felt like not our group, but like mine.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, this is the first time I'm asking for a roll tonight. It's been like 20 minutes. And it felt like, not that that's bad, but like it was just one of those moments where it's like, oh, I gotta remember to like respond to them with this refereeing mechanic rather than just like
Yeah.
living inside of this NPC's head. So,
Hmm. Yeah,
oh,
that's. I've had a few sessions where it's 20, 30 minutes in before the first dice roll, and I feel like those are fine. It's I don't know. It depends on really it depends on if you like to watch D&D or not. Because if you're not the
mhm,
one doing the interacting in those first 20 to 30 minutes, if it's like an NPC talking to an NPC from a particular player's backstory and they're having a
yeah,
conversation, everyone else is just sort of sitting there watching.
yeah.
It
Are they
can,
checking out or
yeah,
not? Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Which I like those things. I
Yeah,
enjoy either participating in or watching those things because I I find them interesting. And then I it sets me up for later to ask the PC about that interaction, right? Which sets up
yeah,
another RP, which I will enjoy.
yeah, absolutely. I I have tried to become incredibly mindful in those moments of like how long that is taking. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like for example, I have a character in the Strahd campaign that has like a dream visitor occasionally,
Hmm.
and I've made it a goal to never let those visitations go longer than 5 minutes because I feel like I don't want to be restricted by that, obviously, but it's just like, okay, let's get those critical pieces of information out, and if it's not completed, like I like the moments. So, for example, Brennan is good about this. He's just like, in the meantime, we're going to bounce over here for a second. I'm like, what are you guys doing? And Matt does that too when the party splits.
Yeah.
Because it's just like hanging out, especially if you're playing online. Like there are so many more temptations rather than like people in front of you.
Yeah,
And even
for
if you're
sure.
in person too, you can make commentary with your like, hey, this is funny or whatever. It's
Yeah,
not going to interrupt it. But
yeah.
I wanna go back to your question because I think we should talk about like you mentioned about pacing and combat because
Hmm.
like you and I have talked about this. Like if you plan a combat, be ready for that sucker to take like an hour. 3 turns for 6 people. Long time.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips for improving the pacing of a combat session?
I mean,
Or does that matter?
it really depends on what they're fighting, right?
Mhm.
If it's a throwaway fight, like if it's just there to okay, I think we should back up and talk about the purpose of combat.
Sure. Yeah.
Because
To kill
some
stuff.
combats are there to resolve an RP thing, right? Those
Hmm.
are the best combats. Those are the juiciest combats.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Some combats are there for immersion, right? You're like
Okay.
you're going through this place. You're not. It's not just a free road that you're going through. There are things in this jungle, and some of those things are hungry, right? So some of those are like immersion fights that like yeah, this stuff jumps out at you because it lives here, and now you're walking through its house. And then some of those fights also serve the purpose of depleting party resources, right? So that the
Sure.
RP fight has more gravitas. It has more
Okay.
like there's more at stake, right? Because
Yeah.
you're down some either HP or resources or something, and now you've got to fight the guy that you've been looking for the whole time.
Right.
So if it is a one of those like I said throwaway fights that it's there for either immersion or as a resource user, I feel like
Hmm.
those can be pushed along a little quicker by um, the DM just knowing what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Like the faster you can get those turns going, and like when you guys were walking through the jungle towards the portal, fighting all the undead,
Yeah.
I tried to make a lot like the smaller waves. I
Hmm.
made them just token fights essentially. Like 2 hits they're
Yeah.
dead. No HP number.
Yeah.
Just you
Right.
hit them twice and they die. Or
I
if you
dig
hit
that.
them for over 20 or crit, then they die.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because it's just a lot. It's so much quicker. And they
Well, and
each
I
do
also,
like one thing. They're mindless zombies essentially. So they gather around the thing and they try to hit it.
yeah. I also liked what you did with like there were a couple waves that you were like, all right, roll. If anybody gets a critical fail, they're gonna lose X amount of HP. Like these are, like you had us fighting against like super like the pawns or whatever, and we're
Mm-hmm.
level 11 or 12, and so it was like, yeah, like you guys could cruise through this, no problem.
Yeah.
But if anybody rolls a one, you're gonna take some hits. And like, I don't know, I thought that that was like, oh, this is an effective, quick way to kind of like for those watching, like our party was marching, and we had like days to go, right, to
Yeah. It
get to
took
the
like 3 days
place.
to get there.
We knew that there was this like source of undead evil badness or whatever, and like there was this like horde of undead that were like repeatedly, it was like zombie mode, like coming towards the local village, and so we were marching to stop it. And so we would routinely come across another wave, and like instead of just like having a regular combat again, you were just like, all right, everybody roll a d20. If anybody gets a 1, you're going to lose HP. So instead of spending like 30 minutes of us fighting like whatever zombies,
Yeah.
like I loved that because I was like, sweet, like this gives us context, it's realistic, but it's also not like,
It's not as big a slog as.
yes, because like combat is an investment. Like, and it, you know,
Yeah.
like I think if you play D&D long enough, like, and especially if your party's larger, like ours is, like, what do you think like the ideal length of a combat is? Like 3, 4 turns, maybe,
Yeah.
or rounds?
Yeah, depending on what you're fighting. Yeah, like
Right.
I would say for most, like the vast majority of combats, like yeah, 3, 4 rounds is kind of pushing it. When you get into like the bigger fights towards the end of the campaign, those can take longer.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I think 3 or 4 rounds is, especially if you've got a bigger party, that's plenty.
Hmm. Yeah, because it takes freaking 20 minutes to get back to your turn again or whatever.
Yeah,
Um,
but yeah,
so I
that's
don't know.
I designed that. I was because I didn't want to be like, oh yeah, you just walk through here and nothing comes at you, because that didn't seem like that
Mhm.
takes away urgency, right? It's like, oh,
Yeah.
maybe this isn't as big a threat. But then I was like, I don't, because there's going to be lots of, like you were talking, like pawn waves, basically, like
Hmm.
waves that you guys could easily take out, and I don't want to take 15 minutes for each one of these. So
Yeah.
if I was like, if everybody engages together, just if you roll a natural one, you're going to take like d6 plus 3 damage or
Yeah.
whatever. I did make you fight them if only one of you decided to fight a wave.
Yeah. Which was fun. Even when it wasn't me, it was like kind of fun to watch how that kind of went down. So, um, I will say, so you mentioned like, hey, like this idea of whittling down player resources, because if you want to like raise the stakes on your fight by being like, hey, like you're out of spell slots or you're low on health or whatever,
Hmm.
like I think that's an interesting idea. I like minimizing the amount of time it takes to do that. So, like for example, your wave kind of thing. I thought
Hmm.
that was cool. Or like, uh, like if you want to diminish resources for the sake of just diminishing resources, I think that that will feel thin or flat for your players. And so like you've got to find a way to make those combat experiences dynamic enough that it's interesting, even if
Hmm.
they're not fighting the general, you know,
Yeah.
whatever it is. So if you have them fight a series of captains, or if you have like an interesting mechanic involved, or it's just like, hey, like you have a couple of series of cool, meaningful combats, but they don't get a long rest because they're in the middle of a place where they could succumb to something or
Hmm.
whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I think if you're doing that, I would say I would encourage you to like find ways to make it interesting or meaningful instead of just like, all right, I'm gonna throw crap at you until you run out of stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with
So,
that. I have been entertaining the idea of switching the long rest rules back to a more normal set
mhm.
of long rest rules. So well, tell me your thoughts on this, because I like the idea of having to manage your resources,
Yes.
but I also like the idea of just burning through all your stuff
Yeah.
for fun. So it's like I'm sort of stuck between the two, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure which is more rewarding.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like, because I, it's super fun to just be like, we're gonna get a long rest no matter what, so I
Yeah.
can use
Yeah.
every spell slot I have on this fight and
Right.
be just fine. But at the same time, like, that becomes it makes it to where your spells don't mean as much, right?
Right.
But and that can come across narratively too, because if you're like, oh yeah, anytime I see anything, fireball it right in the face.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it becomes like, why doesn't everyone just fireball all their problems always?
Right. Real life motto too. Fireball all your problems. You know, it's funny. You know, I feel cheesy for always harkening back to it, but I remember watching Critical Role once and I'd be like, dude, they use all their stuff all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I should be less stingy about popping that 4th level spell or whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
kind of lame for me to hang on to fill in the blank, right? Like,
Yeah.
my wife plays a fighter and she's like, I don't know if I want to use Second Wind or Action Surge right now. And I'm like, all it takes is a short rest. Like, flip and do it and feel effing cool. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, so I hear you on that sentiment. And it makes it tricky because I think if you do that, then as a DM, you're like, okay, if I want to give them the experience of feeling low on gas, then I have to do it in a much smaller, like, space, time frame, geographical location, or whatever, right? Like,
Yeah.
it makes it tough. I don't know.
Yeah. And it's because the other way to do it is like the way that we do it, which is like you aren't sure when your next long rest is going to be. You know that it's going to be difficult, versus like, oh, you can get a long rest anytime, and then suddenly spring on them, oh, your long rest gets interrupted.
Yeah,
And that can feel
feels
so
awesome.
much worse. You're like, oh great,
Yeah.
I literally have nothing left.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I remember that happened on Critical Role when they were following Molly down into Aor.
Yeah.
And they were like, okay, that's fine. We'll get a long rest. They set up the dome and everything, and their long rest got interrupted. And they're like, well, we have to go, though. And they just had to go and had nothing left to spend. And I'm not sure that feels better or worse than just being like, well, long rests are a little difficult.
Yeah. It's a reminder to me as a player that, like I think that's something's interesting. I don't know. I have not played this game super long, and so you could tell me otherwise. But like, I have a brother-in-law that played this game back in like first, second edition and stuff like that.
Okay.
And just the idea that like you're gonna tear up character sheets like was like commonplace. Just, like, yeah, like characters die all the time. Like, he DM'd for us for like a big family get together or whatever, and he asked all of us to make 2 characters. And he opened up the session with this like big battle of everyone against the undead, and he kind of breezed through it real quick. And it felt good. And then there was this like massive like Wrath of the Lich King style like plague bombing, you know?
Okay.
And he's like, I need everybody to roll, and if you roll like 1 to 10, I want this character. If you roll 11 to 20, I want this character. And he like collects all their character sheets and tears them all up in front of us. It's like, they're all dead. And it's like, oh, I made that character. So it's like, all right, it was a way that in the first half hour of the game, he could whittle all these like, okay, cool. We all got the experience of dying without, like, we made 2 characters, so it didn't feel as bad, I guess. I don't know. But it was interesting. Like, it's stuff like that where it's just like, hey, it can be fun to lean into those moments of desperation, because there is like this feeling of like, I want to get my long rest, full HP, all my spell slots, I am safe. That's
Hmm.
like, if you want to be safe, go play like go play a Final Fantasy game. Like D&D is an opportunity for you to push those boundaries and be like, oh frick, what are we gonna do? Rather than like, oh, this isn't fun because my DM is like making me experience difficulty. Like that's one thing I appreciate about Jason so many times. He's like, by the way, if you kill me, no big deal. Like I'm kind of interested to experience that. Like throw your worst at us. I'm like, I'm glad that you're willing to like engage in this.
Yeah.
He even said he's like, I want to introduce D&D to my children so that they understand that adversity is like a part of life and you need to problem solve your way out of hard situations. I'm like, I'm here for escapism, so
I'm glad you're enjoying it. That's not what I'm doing. I'm kind of here for the opposite.
in our last session he did almost well, he got knocked unconscious and he could have died, but it wasn't his fault. I overtuned the thing.
That's yeah,
Uh,
that's uh fight tuning is always a thing that's like, well, it's very difficult because there are dice involved, right? There's this,
yeah,
the element of randomness is ever present in D&D,
yeah,
and you can do your best, and if fate says so, that's just what happens.
yeah, absolutely.
um yeah, that's with player death and stuff. It's weird because I never want my characters to die, but I I'm okay with it. I would rather that their story be finished first. And as far as like just like how you're talking about ripping up character sheets was like a regular thing, I feel and I don't know because I never played either anything besides 5e basically. Uh,
Mm,
and in our campaigns, I feel like many of us put a lot of effort into backstories, and if you do that, and then your character dies in session 2, it can
yeah,
feel real bad.
yeah. I'll say this: a panacea, like having two or three backups in mind makes it less awful. There's been times, even in this campaign, where it's just like, it'd be really cool for me to try out this paladin I've been thinking about. But I do agree. Like, there's an element of like for example, our campaign. Like, there's a couple things that are just like, I really want to see if that's gonna play out. But so
um,
you gotta invest enough to care, but not so much to be like beholden to it.
Devastated. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You talk
Um,
about pacing, like shoot, that would like completely disrupt the pacing of your campaign.
yeah. Especially if it's like it's bad for the DM too if he's tying these backstories into the narrative of the overall plot. It's like,
Yeah,
oh well, I guess throw that out.
yeah. Let's
That's
recycle
not
it.
happening.
We're gonna tie it into something
It's tough.
else.
Sometimes those things are so
Pretty
specific
concrete.
that they cannot be recycled.
Yeah,
Um, at some point, I will tell
sure.
everyone what was in store for uh,
Atrix.
Atrix. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to go finish his backstory myself. Like, in the memory of Atrix, let's go find this kingdom of his, I guess.
um,
Yeah.
but the last sort of thing I wanted to talk about pacing was uh, like campaign slash arc pacing. Do you
Mhm.
think um, having like how many sessions do you feel is good to go without a combat? And this is a completely personal opinion because some people only want combat and some people care zero for combat. So
I mean, like, it could be combat, it could be RP, it could be like travel, it could be like huge, like plot twist narrative bomb. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm.
Like, I think you should like step back from your campaign and kind of think about like, okay, where are we and what have we been working on doing? Because like like you said earlier, like things get stale after a while. Like if everything's important, then the things that should be important get watered down.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's important to like, hey, it's just like a movie or like a book or anything. Like sometimes you just need to like, if you're always at like sixth gear, like 100%, like it just kind of feels like exhausting almost.
Yeah.
Like it's important to have a break once in a while. So like, I think identifying like the feel. I think the answer to that question is like, I want to identify the feel of my players and where they're at and where we are at as a means of storytelling. Because maybe like, hey, we should have back-to-back, you know, combat encounters that are meaningful and huge.
Mm-hmm.
And other times it's just like, hey, we haven't had one in a couple sessions, but that's okay because like you guys are really working through some stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like for example, when I keep going back to this, my Strahd campaign, like the last session, like they knocked out some like significant narrative hooks. And so for like the next session that I'm planning on, like I am probably not going to throw anything at them that is just like big reveal. It's like, all right, let's have it. Let's come down off of like you think about like a. I think D&D is like a series of strung together like what were those called? Like the plot maps or whatever, like rising action,
Oh, okay.
climax,
Yeah.
falling action. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it could be a string of those, and like maybe your overall campaign it looks like one,
Mm-hmm.
but like from session to session, I think they could look like that a little bit.
Yeah.
So like the
For
last
sure.
one, they kind of had several like climax moments. Like this next one, it helps with where they're at because it's just like okay, we're going to be doing some overland travel, like before you get to the next place and stuff like that, because you literally need to get from A to B now.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm not gonna drop you in the middle of like, okay, you made it, you're good. 'Cause where's the fun in that? But
That's another
uh,
thing I want to talk about was travel, because
mhm.
in the framework of pacing, travel can sometimes feel very slow,
Yeah, absolutely.
particularly if like if there's no like plot related things happening during the travel. If you're just literally getting from A to B and there's a
Hmm.
road in between,
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
like a lot of times it's just okay, we're gonna fast travel, and that's the way I kind of do it in my campaign. Is like if anybody wants to do anything, stop me.
yeah.
But this is what's happening, and
Otherwise, yeah.
and I ideally, my ideal campaign goes between high points on plot to high
Hmm.
points on character development
Yeah.
and back and forth. So like you have a big plot episode or session, and then you
Oh, that's
have a
cool.
big episode that is character development and hopefully player driven.
Yeah.
But that's not something the DM can control. So on those
Walk
sessions
back and
where
forth.
I'm expecting
I like that.
like yeah, when I'm expecting oh this big thing just happened to this player character,
Mhm.
I'm expecting to like their characters to sort of chat about that. And sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't. And if it doesn't, you have to move on. But that is what is the sort of ideal mold for me.
Yeah.
But
I think
again, I can't control
expectations
that.
are really important too.
Yeah.
Like, like specific to travel, for example. Like when we pick up with our next session, I'm gonna tell my players like, okay, it's gonna take you. Like they know because they have a map and they've been told by an NPC, like, hey, it's gonna take you 4-ish days to get there. And so over the next 4 days, mechanically, I'm going to have you guys roll a survival check to see how efficient you are in your travel. And depending on that roll, I'm going to have you roll on a random encounter table. Um, and I think you can, as a DM, like you can help. Same thing with like combat moments too, like finding ways to make them dynamic rather than just like, okay, just throwing these things at you. Let's roll dice at each other until it's resolved and then move on. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's not fun. Like there's a random encounter table in Strahd. I'm gonna use like an eighth of it. Like there's so much of it that I'm just like that seems super lame. I'm not gonna do that. Um, And then I'm gonna have to try to figure out things like, hey, this is meaningful, or I think this is interesting. So, but like clearly mentioning like, okay, players, like this is what's gonna happen for the next hour or so of our game time is like you need to actually make it there. That's part of this game. It's like, like I had a moment in that death house where like the house was collapsing, and like rather than just kind of like, hey, the house is collapsing, what do you want to do? I was like, okay, the house is collapsing. Somebody roll me 2d4. That's how many turns you have to get out of the house. So we're gonna like, and there's gonna be traps along the way and encounters that you'll have. And I told them that from the start, and so they felt this like, oh shit, like sense of urgency, and it made it like one of the highlights of the campaign so far because like they barely made it out. Um,
Do you
but they knew
think?
from the get go,
Do you think that?
right?
Do you have how do you feel about telling players mechanics like that up front versus just having them behind the scenes, but still like telling them that there is a serious sense of urgency? Like don't tell them how many turns it is, but just tell them like
Yeah.
things are starting to buckle down here. It looks bad. How do you feel about the difference there?
I think that for my campaign and my players, like they're new to D&D, right?
Right.
And so like this is something that I mentioned to you that I want to talk about at some point is like fostering an environment for like it's poignant for me because they're new and
Mm-hmm.
there's this element of like you don't know that you can literally do whatever you want. Like there's still moments where I'm like, Brian, wake up, like you can do anything you want, so like use that to your advantage. Um so like in our last campaign session, there was a moment where like they said something and it felt like this like light bulb went on, and I was just like, yeah, like you can freaking do that, dude. Let's play. So for me with my newer table, like I want to introduce them to that because it's like, hey, like I feel like I have to reveal like how the sausage is made a little bit more
Fair.
to get the engagement going.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you're like with an experienced group, you don't have to tell them that. But I think like it depends on the players you have too. Like for me, like I love the fact that this is also a game, and so like it's fun to be like, okay, here are the rules because rules make things fun.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so for me, it's like a personal thing, but I guess it's unique to your table. Like if it ruins the moment or if it feels like, I think if you have players on a table where kind of like I don't know, it takes you out of it, it breaks the fourth wall a little bit too much, then yeah, I think that's fine for you to roll on your own. But
Um, it was kind of a moment like that. Whenever you guys went back to Ivia's mansion and saw all of the Gilded Shadow people like looking around outside,
Mhm.
and while you guys were discussing it, I started rolling a die.
Yeah, and we freaking noticed and shat our pants.
That's what I was going to ask you
That
about. Was that effective? Because I didn't know. First off, I didn't know if you could even hear it, but I guess it was coming across.
I saw it.
Oh, you saw it? Okay.
Yeah, because you have. I mean, like it's enough. Like, yeah. Oh man, highly effective. I loved it. It was just like talk about pacing. Like we kept like just like okay, well this is happening around you guys. You know, go. I think it's I think it's important to give your players moments when they really need it, but I also think it's just as important to like push them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like in the strong campaign, like I gave them. It's funny, I didn't even realize this. There is a notable death of one of the characters, like that's already built in, of one of the NPCs, and I just for the sake of giving them an opportunity for a long rest, like Strahd's like, hey, with the death of your father, customary, you get 3 days of grieving in this like cultural place,
Mm-hmm.
Like I just had it as like a means to like, you could take a long rest and you can escape town and make a plan without feeling like he's breathing down your neck.
Okay.
Like I needed to give them a reason that Strahd wasn't going to be like, hey, why isn't he just coming after us right now? And then later my brother, he was like, dude, I love that. Like we have 72 hours to get a jump, like a head start to get away. And I was just like, I didn't even realize it, that was something that I had done. necessarily, and that's how he took it. Like I thought that was so cool, you know.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I think it depends on your table and your players. But I'll tell you, that moment I loved. Like that was cool.
Yeah, I didn't, like I said, I didn't know if you guys could tell. I was just rolling, and if I ever hit a nat 20, one of them was going to be like, "It's over here."
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we could. I think we could tell. Like, oh my god, because we had to do that to find it, right?
Yeah.
Like not a nat 20, but like
I mean, it ended up,
check.
it was a nat 20
There you
that,
go.
that found it. So it was like, at that, like, I had a DC set, but whenever Joe hit a nat 20, I was like, that's the DC now.
Yeah. So it was this element of like, dude, it's only going to be so long until one of them finds us. And, yeah. So, I liked your question because I think it's important for DMs to remember, like, to take a step back and be like, how long has it been since this, or do I feel like things are stalled? Should I introduce? And then you just kind of pick your flavor, right? Like, what ingredient do you need to like dash in? You know,
Yeah.
like, have they kind of lost touch with the overarching plot? Do we need to have a moment like that, or like, you know?
Yeah. And a lot of that, like, especially about, because it's, I mean, even the best tables generally only play once a week, and that a lot can be forgotten over the course of a week. So having a little recap is really good at the top of the session. And sometimes I do bring up things that are super old if I feel like they have recently become relevant again.
Yeah.
But I try to avoid that sometimes when it's not something that's supposed to be super evident, in hopes that if one of you guys remember it, awesome, bonus points. But it's not,
Right.
you don't have to know it. It's just a,
Right.
but that's what I like.
Yeah. For my campaign, I keep there's a list of things where it's just like I am going to tell them this again. It's pivotal. And then there's a list of things where it's like if they remember it, that's cool.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna like. There's only so much that like.
Yeah, let me recap the last 72 hours of gameplay for you in 1 minute.
Yeah. Some of it, like, you're not going to move on if you don't remember this. And then some of it's like,
Yeah.
if that was interesting to you and you want to follow it, cool. If not, package it up for something else.
Yep. I think we covered a lot.
Yeah, I do want to, like, are there small things that you can do to make sure that you're not stalling or pacing, like mechanical tips that you have? Like, are there things that you like that, like, so for example, like the way that you did that zombie wave thing, like, are there other examples of mechanical things that you can do to make sure you're not getting bogged down?
I mean, the token fights is a thing that I didn't come up with. I just used it because I thought it was a good thing, which is normally it's just one hit and they're dead. Mm-hmm. There's no HP. I did 2 hits because I wanted to make sure that it was somewhat relevant and urgent, like,
yeah.
Because otherwise, if it was just 1 hit per thing, like, the town's fine, they don't need your help.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I did that with the right when you got to town too, right? All those things were pawns essentially.
Yeah.
Like the 70 or whatever zombies that were attacking the town. So that's a way you can sort of speed things up without taking too much away. I feel like is not have an HP total that you have to keep track of for every, especially if there's a lot of individual things. And I had them during that part. I was rolling 1d20 per section of wall.
Yeah.
So I wasn't rolling individual attacks on 70 zombies. I was rolling, did they hit this wall hard enough to make damage to the wall?
Mm-hmm.
It's I guess different objectives in combat, right? Because their objective was not to kill you, it was to knock down a wall and get inside this town. You guys were trying to kill them before they did that. So it's
right.
That's a tip, I guess. But yeah, and having like as far as like, because random encounter tables can be, I like them sometimes and sometimes I don't, and I feel like the way to make them cool is to set a DC where if the party like set a DC, have the party roll, they have a chance to see the encounter first, and then they can decide whether they want to run at it or try to go around it. And then that way, if because it's sort of a gauge for like, is my party feeling like they want to play combat D&D right now, or are they trying to get to the place they're going? So if they're trying to get around stuff, like they may not succeed still, but at least it gives them the option to try.
Choice.
It's just like to try to not do combat, and that way, even if they fail, it feels a little better. Like, oh, we're trying to sneak around. Oh, they caught us. We got to do something now, as opposed to, oh, it's a combat. Let's go.
I like the stakes of it too. Like if okay, roll for your day, and it's like, oh, I rolled in that one, and it's like, all right, I need you to roll 2d8.
Yeah.
Like, what the freak does that mean? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do like that. I guess it's like the more sort of grueling combats are the ones where there are just lots and lots of monsters, and they're all having to take a turn. Those ones, and I try to like. Even like the waves that you guys fought going through the thing, I tried to like just quickly, okay, here's all their attacks, so 3 hits, roll the damage, and try to just get through them very quickly, while still like giving service to them. Like here's their like describing how they're attacking, like, oh, they're all just like reaching out at you, like just trying to scratch and pull.
That makes a big difference, though. Like, you know, I cast Eldritch Blast, and I have 3 of them, so I could just roll, like, that one hit, here's the damage. That one missed. This one, next one hit, here's the damage. But, like, instead of just like, here's all 3, add 10 to it, and then here's the damage for all of it. Like, I know some DMs that are like, I heard something the other day where somebody was just like, if you don't roll your damage dice along with your roll to hit, you lose your turn. Like, we gotta keep. I'm like, gosh, like that is.
That's pretty brutal.
Yeah, for real. But like the purpose is like if you miss, then whatever. But if you hit, you already have your damage, and so it's just like you can just go to the next person. Like, I've also heard like some people like to like, oh, we're fighting a goblin encampment. So like, yeah, there's 25 goblins there, but like instead of having 25 individual goblins, they're like, no, there's gonna be like 5 packs of 5. So like I'm gonna move all of these 5 together and roll 1d20, and if they hit, then you take this damage, and if you don't, like, whatever.
Yeah, so. And that's another way you can do it. It's always just talk to your party or your table, because like sometimes they're like, but I don't want to take all that damage from 1d20.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, and another way to sort of make those random encounters more fulfilling is that, I mean, you can't always do it, but you can occasionally have something that they have on them that leads to something else, either whether it be like a really cool item that you guys can use, or just be like a piece of paper that's like it starts to unravel this little minor mystery that you can look into later.
Yeah, I think that's cool. Like if you're building random encounters, like if you can tie some of them together on the travel, like if that's possible, or even just have them kind of like, okay, like let's say your table has 10 different outcomes, and outcome 10 is like, okay, they had outcome 10 once, now the next outcome 10 is tied to it, regardless of wherever that. I think that's cool.
Yeah. A little tougher to do, but yes, very cool.
Yeah, and I mean, like you could change the values however you want. Like, hey, 7 through 10, they're gonna discover this stack of coins or whatever just on the side of the road, and then like the next 7 through 10, like they run into a person who lost that money. And it's like, hey, your players realize like, oh, we have the money that we found. Do we give it to that person? Or whatever, right? So.
And it doesn't have to
But
be like a major plot point. It can totally just
Mhm.
be a little one off.
Right.
Because
Yeah,
it
which I think
doesn't.
are fun to have on the side.
Yeah.
So I think as long as you are finding a way to have fun yourself with your players like throughout, and that fun is going to look different. Like sometimes it's going to feel harrowing, other times it's going to feel very relaxed. But like the whole point is entertainment, right?
Yep.
So, and that is going to look. I mean, it can be entertaining to feel like devastated. But if you're
Sure.
always feeling devastated, it's like, oh, another cool NPC died in a very dramatic way, like that gets tired after a while. Like you only have so many bullets, I think, and you gotta like, okay, we're switching to this one.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to eat the same food every day. So,
Unless it's pizza.
but
Even then, it can get old after a while. But
this
uh,
pizza has different toppings,
that's
so it
right.
tastes
It's
completely
delicious.
different.
Um. Yeah. Did you have
Man,
any closing thoughts?
no, just pacing is so. I mean, there's like so many elements to it, so I feel like we're kind of across the board. But like, I wanted to bring all of them back into this idea that like there are so many different ways that it can feel like D&D is stalling out, and
Mm-hmm.
so like you gotta keep things moving, both as player and DM. You know what I mean? Like there are times when I recognize as a player, like I'm being too skittish and safe. Like we got to take risks, And as a DM, it's like I either need to like throw something at them or help them remember or remind them or kind of like, hey, this is I recall this very pivotal piece of information. Oh, that's right. Okay, now we're going to go do that.
Yeah. And yeah, and like I was saying earlier, between the like plot to character development and sort of back and forth, remember as a player that you have the agency to make things happen between the characters.
Yeah, totally.
That's the
Yeah.
thing that like the first campaign I did. Uh, it's like particularly before you got there because it was still very new. The characters didn't really talk to each other much, so it was like it, it was more the DM was me. I was more heavily relied upon to make any story, and
Yeah.
what we sort of talked about it, and I was like, feel free to talk amongst yourselves because it's interesting, and it can
Yeah.
also guide the story. So yeah, if you're a player and in the session is feeling a little low, like slow, remember that you can just go talk to the other PCs and be like, hey, what's going on with you?
Yeah.
I fill in the blank with your interesting backstory thing,
hmm
and then
Well,
like
yeah.
gets more of them to want to be in on your part of the story.
Like I have had this thought where it's like I want to identify like because you always tell us when we're traveling, like if you want to have a conversation, let me know. Otherwise, we're gonna move on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a great tactic to like not just sit around.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I have taken it upon myself to be like, okay, what are things that I would want to ask the other players or talk about? And some of them are like serious, and other ones are like kind of dumb. Most of them are dumb. But I do think that like it's a good thing to do. I think it's a good like player to player thing. Like it's just like good manners because like these things happen to us, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, my father died or like whatever, right? And it's like a player will never actually get a chance to express how they feel about it unless they're asked by another player character.
Yeah.
Like so there's been moments where it's just like, hey, you doing good? Like, do you want to talk about that? And it's like that. I don't know. I just think that that's where the meat is. So, like, for example, in your campaign, like one of the very first things that we saw was like Mouse lost his like passer and father figure type,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and like he's never gonna like in the moment he had the chance to take vengeance on his father's killer, but like to actually like express what that meant to him, like we'd never know if we didn't ask him.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and that's the thing that I feel like is missing from a lot of campaigns, and it's
yeah,
just because either the players are not that close with each other and they don't feel comfortable expressing those kinds of emotions even in an RP setting,
yeah,
which is something that you just have to either, work through or say you're not going to do, I guess.
right,
Um,
yeah.
but I feel like that is the best D&D.
Mm-hmm. Fun. I mean, it's very cathartic.
Yeah. It's
So,
like, can I experience these? Can I practice feeling these emotions before I have to go back into the real
yeah,
world and have them?
yeah, yeah. This is a safe place to like express grief, loss, excitement, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Um, I'll ask one more pacing question, and that is,
sure.
uh, how do you feel about gambling on tournaments in D&D?
I had a lot of fun with that.
I
I
know
had a lot
you
of fun
did,
with that.
and
Yeah,
maybe a couple other people did, but not everyone did.
yeah, and like that's it's so hard to like play to everybody's interests, you know.
Yeah.
But it is one of those things where it's just like I don't know. Like, what are you gonna do, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
there. I mean, we did the whole like business tycoon shipping thing, which
Yeah.
was fun for some of us and not fun for everybody. Like,
Yeah.
so I think there's an element of like, as a player, just being respectful and being present, even if it's not your shtick.
Yeah. And
Um,
that's all pacing is like find
I,
like
I,
who's enjoying it and let
yeah,
them enjoy it.
and I think too, like, regardless of whatever it is, combat, RP, that whole gambling thing, whatever it is, like, I think you asked this question earlier, whether like how long between sessions should you do this, but also like how long in your session should that element happen? You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like, if you have a whole shopping episode, you might lose some of your players. And so it's like, I think knowing your players well enough to be like, okay, like I fleshed out these really cool shops and these super personable, like personality filled shopkeepers, but you know, Bill and Frank hate that kind of stuff. We're not going to do that then. It's going to be one shop. He has the magic stuff. Very
Mm-hmm.
transactional. Here you go. And you're off to the next dungeon.
Yeah.
But, you know,
Yep.
um, it can be tough to cater to everybody, especially if you have a cool idea. And I think if you're going to introduce it like a new thing, like, okay, we're going to try this new thing, like, like that whole dream sequence thing with I wasn't sure how that was going to go because it was like the first time that we had like a only you moment. I was like, I'm just going to keep this to 5 minutes. And if it goes off well, great. But if it doesn't, then okay, 5 minutes wasn't that big of a commitment. So
Yeah. All right. So there you go. Pacing in D&D.
yeah,
Thanks for chatting with me. Thanks to everyone for watching, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
goodbye.